Satanic Saturn rings refers to the belief that the distinctive ring system surrounding our solar system's sixth planet serves as a cosmic symbol of dark occult forces. Saturn's rings consist of countless ice and rock particles orbiting the gas giant, creating what appears to be solid bands when viewed from Earth. But conspiracy theorists focus on something far more unusual: a massive hexagonal storm system that has been raging at Saturn's north pole for decades. This six-sided geometric pattern spans roughly 25,000 kilometers across, larger than two Earths placed side by side. NASA's Cassini spacecraft captured detailed images of this phenomenon between 2004 and 2017, showing the hexagon maintaining its precise shape while rotating every 10 hours and 39 minutes. The conspiracy centers on the hexagon's resemblance to occult symbols, particularly the Star of David and various ceremonial pentagrams used in ritual magic. Saturn itself carries heavy mythological baggage. The Romans named it after their god of agriculture and time, who devoured his own children. The Greeks called it Kronos, associated with death and the harvest of souls. Some theorists claim this hexagonal formation acts as an interdimensional gateway or broadcasting antenna, transmitting negative energy throughout our solar system. They point to Saturn's prominent role in ancient mystery schools and secret societies, noting how the planet's symbol appears in everything from corporate logos to architectural designs. The timing raises eyebrows too. The hexagon was first discovered by Voyager spacecraft in 1981, but NASA allegedly kept detailed images classified for years. When higher resolution photos finally emerged, the geometric perfection seemed almost artificial, too precise for a natural weather system. This has led to theories that Saturn functions as some kind of cosmic prison or control matrix, with its rings serving as the bars and the hexagonal storm as the lock mechanism keeping humanity trapped in a lower vibrational state. Symbiogenesis refers to the theory that evolution occurs through cooperation rather than competition, with entirely new species emerging when different organisms merge together permanently. The basic idea holds that mitochondria and chloroplasts in our cells were once independent bacteria that got absorbed by larger cells around 2 billion years ago. The contemporary theory taught in schools stops short of the full theory proposed by its discoverers. What students learn about cellular organelles barely scratches the surface of a much more radical vision of evolution that challenges everything we think we know about how life develops. Russian botanist Konstantin Mereshkovsky first outlined symbiogenesis in 1905, proposing that complex life forms originated through symbiotic bacteria merging to form nuclei and chloroplasts. American researcher Ivan Volin followed up with experiments in the 1920s, publishing his findings in 1927 in a book called Symbionticism and the Origin of Species that was largely ignored. The theory remained buried until microbiologist Lynn Margulis revived it in the 1960s. Her landmark paper was rejected by about 15 scientific journals before finally being accepted. Margulis argued that random mutation and natural selection were just minor cogs in evolution's machinery, while the real leaps forward resulted from mergers between different organisms. From the beginning, symbiologists adhered to holistic approaches that countered the mechanical and reductionist approaches characterizing mainstream science. Its early associations with Western socialist thought, including Marxism, created a red flag for neoliberal and Darwinian establishments. The controversy deepened when Margulis expanded her theories beyond cellular evolution. She denied that HIV causes AIDS, claiming instead that AIDS symptoms resulted from a symbiotic relationship with syphilis bacteria that became undetectable by integrating into patients' genomes. She also became a vocal 9/11 conspiracy theorist, stating that 19 young Arab men could not have masterminded the most effective television commercial in Western civilization history. Despite growing evidence supporting symbiogenesis in microbiome research, the theory as speciation mechanism has been written off by neo-Darwinists to the degree that it's almost impossible to find stated discreetly on Wikipedia outside of mentions of Lynn Margulis. Margulis viewed the living world as a pointillist painting where individual bacteria formed complex communities, with every visible organism being a product of symbiogenesis without exception. Her vision suggested that cooperation, not competition, drove the major evolutionary innovations that created the complex life surrounding us today. The Bhutanese shadow market represents one of the more bizarre conspiracy theories to emerge from the depths of internet forums. This theory suggests that Bhutanese monks participate in the illicit trade of spiritually taboo commodities, including the souls of individuals, immortality, and various arcane or occult objects, which are deemed forbidden within the principles of Buddhism. The Bhutanese shadow market is conceptualized as metaphysical, having to use astral projection to access it according to some users. Unlike traditional black markets that deal in physical goods, this supposed marketplace trades exclusively in abstract concepts. Bhutan has one of the most active and powerful closed societies of magical practitioners, and the shadow markets are places where abstract concepts are for sale. The conspiracy first surfaced on the paranormal board of 4chan in August 2017. It is noteworthy that the first recorded reference to the Bhutanese shadow market appears to coincide with the release of the Mortal Instruments series and its own portrayal of a shadow market. This timing suggests the theory may have drawn inspiration from popular supernatural fiction rather than genuine occult traditions. What makes this theory particularly unsettling is its connection to historical Buddhist practices. Explorer and scholar Lawrence Waddell writes in his 1895 The Buddhism of Tibet about the death rituals of the Red Hat sect of Buddhism dominant in Bhutan. On the occurrence of a death, the body is not disturbed in any way until the Lama has extracted the soul in the orthodox manner. Conspiracy theorists point to these documented soul extraction rituals as evidence that Bhutanese monks already possess the knowledge necessary to manipulate spiritual essence. The market allegedly operates beyond physical dimensions, accessible only through astral projection techniques. Participants claim that buyers can purchase everything from immortality to specific memories, with pricing determined by the spiritual significance and rarity of the commodity being traded. Mark Lombardi was an American artist whose hand-drawn diagrams mapped out some of the most complex and controversial financial networks in modern history. His intricate web-like drawings connected politicians, banks, corporations, and intelligence agencies in ways that revealed patterns most people never see. Lombardi spent years researching public records, news articles, and government documents to create what he called narrative structures. These weren't random conspiracy charts scribbled on a basement wall. They were methodically researched artworks that traced the flow of money and influence through major scandals of the 1980s and 1990s. His most famous piece documented the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, known as BCCI, which collapsed in 1991 amid revelations of money laundering, arms dealing, and connections to intelligence agencies. Lombardi's diagram showed how this single bank connected everyone from Manuel Noriega to members of the Bush family, creating a visual representation of corruption that spanned continents. What makes Lombardi's story particularly intriguing is his death in March 2000. Officials ruled it a self-removal, but the timing raised eyebrows among those familiar with his work. He had recently gained significant attention from major museums and was preparing for his first solo exhibition at the Whitney Museum of American Art. The circumstances seemed odd to some observers. Lombardi was finally achieving recognition after years of struggling as an artist. His work was being taken seriously by institutions, and he had been interviewed by federal investigators about his BCCI research just months before his death. Some point to the fact that certain government agencies had shown interest in his diagrams, viewing them as potential intelligence tools. Others note that his meticulous documentation of financial networks might have made powerful people uncomfortable, especially as his work gained mainstream attention. Whether his death was truly self-inflicted or something more sinister, Lombardi's diagrams remain as detailed maps of how money and power actually flow through the corridors of influence, far removed from the sanitized versions presented in official histories. Nuclear grid theory refers to the work of Bruce Canti, a New Zealand airline pilot who claimed to have discovered a mathematical pattern governing when and where nuclear weapons can actually detonate. After spotting a UFO over Auckland Harbor in 1952, Canti spent decades developing what he called harmonic mathematics to map an invisible energy grid covering the entire planet. According to Canti's calculations, nuclear bombs cannot simply be triggered anywhere at any time. Instead, they require precise positioning at specific grid intersections and must be detonated during exact temporal windows when planetary alignments create the proper harmonic conditions. He believed nuclear explosions tap into the same geological energy sources that power UFO craft, explaining why both phenomena appear to follow identical grid patterns. The most compelling aspect of Canti's theory lies in his documented predictions. He claimed to have successfully calculated the exact dates of French nuclear tests at Mururoa Atoll in the South Pacific during the 1968 period, allegedly notifying authorities beforehand through his harmonic equations. These calculations involved converting standard measurements into nautical miles and what he termed grid seconds, creating mathematical relationships between the speed of light, Earth's magnetic field, and gravitational acceleration. Canti's grid system connects ancient sites like Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids with modern UFO sightings and nuclear facilities. He argued that advanced civilizations throughout history understood this energy matrix, using it to construct massive monuments and power otherworldly technologies. The grid supposedly explains why certain locations repeatedly attract unusual phenomena while others remain completely inactive. Isla Bermeja, bombed by US, refers to claims that the United States military deliberately destroyed a small Mexican island to redraw maritime boundaries and secure valuable oil drilling rights in the Gulf of Mexico. For over 400 years, Isla Bermeja appeared on official Mexican maps as a tiny piece of land roughly 100 kilometers north of the Yucatan Peninsula. This seemingly insignificant dot of Earth carried enormous geopolitical weight, because it served as a reference point for Mexico's territorial waters and exclusive economic zone in the Gulf. The island's location meant that Mexico could claim drilling rights to vast underwater oil reserves that would otherwise fall under US jurisdiction. We're talking about billions of barrels of crude oil and trillions of cubic feet of natural gas sitting beneath the seabed. Everything changed in the 1990s when Mexican officials conducted surveys to precisely map their maritime boundaries for negotiations with the United States. The problem was simple and shocking. Isla Bermeja had completely vanished. No trace of the island could be found despite extensive searches using sonar, satellite imagery, and underwater exploration. Mexican researchers and conspiracy theorists point to several suspicious circumstances. The island disappeared sometime between the 1970s and 1990s, coinciding with increased US interest in Gulf oil exploration. They claim that American forces used underwater explosives to systematically demolish the island, sinking it beneath the waves to eliminate Mexico's legal claim to the surrounding waters. The official explanation suggests that Isla Bermeja never actually existed as a permanent landmass. Geologists argue it may have been a sandbar, coral formation, or temporary accumulation of sediment that eroded naturally over time. Some maps from the colonial period are notoriously inaccurate, leading to phantom islands that persisted in cartography for centuries. But skeptics note the convenient timing of the disappearance just as oil became more valuable and extraction technology improved. They also point out that the US gained significant drilling rights in areas that would have belonged to Mexico if Isla Bermeja still existed. The theory gained traction when Mexican Senator Andrés Manuel López Obrador formally accused the United States of destroying the island in 2009. He demanded an investigation and called the alleged bombing an act of aggression against Mexican sovereignty. Whether through natural erosion or deliberate destruction, the absence of Isla Bermeja shifted millions of square kilometers of potentially oil-rich seabed from Mexican to American control. Simonton's pancakes refers to one of the most bizarrely mundane UFO encounters in recorded history. On April 18, 1961, chicken farmer Joe Simonton of Eagle River, Wisconsin experienced what would become the strangest breakfast exchange of the 20th century. The 60-year-old farmer was enjoying a late morning meal when he heard what sounded like a jet engine directly above his house. Stepping outside, Simonton witnessed a chrome-bright, saucer-shaped craft descending into his backyard like an elevator. The object resembled two wash bowls placed face-to-face and hovered just above the ground. What happened next defied every expectation of alien contact. A hatch opened on top of the craft, revealing three humanoid beings about 5 feet tall, wearing matching blue turtleneck outfits and knit caps. Simonton described them as having an Italian appearance, which seems oddly specific for beings from another world. One of the visitors emerged holding a jug and made drinking gestures, apparently requesting water. Simonton obliged, heading to his basement to fill the container. When he returned, he observed something extraordinary through the open hatch. One of the beings was cooking what appeared to be pancakes on a flameless grill inside their spacecraft. Simonton gestured that he would like to try their food, and the beings handed him 4 of their freshly made pancakes. The craft then sealed up and departed as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving the farmer standing in his driveway with a stack of extraterrestrial breakfast items. Being a practical man, Simonton decided to sample the alien cuisine. He immediately regretted this decision, later telling reporters that the pancakes tasted like cardboard and were hot and greasy. He kept 1 pancake for himself and submitted the others to government laboratories for analysis. The Air Force Technical Intelligence Center analyzed the specimens and found them to be made of completely ordinary terrestrial ingredients, including flour, sugar, grease, buckwheat hulls, wheat bran, and soybean hulls. Nothing alien about them whatsoever. However, this is where the conspiracy takes hold. Rumors began circulating that the government was covering up crucial details about the pancakes. Some claimed the flour was of an unknown extraterrestrial type that officials refused to identify. Others suggested the pancakes were completely protein-free, which would be highly unusual for any food item. More elaborate theories emerged connecting the pancakes to biblical references, suggesting that since pancakes are occasionally mentioned in scripture, the aliens were actually spiritual beings manifesting in physical form. The timing and location were analyzed through numerology to support these claims. The case was investigated by Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official UFO investigation program. They concluded that Simonton had experienced a vivid hallucination, combined with a waking dream while preparing his own breakfast. Psychologists agreed that while Simonton genuinely believed his experience occurred, the inconsistencies and lack of supporting evidence pointed to a mental episode rather than actual contact. What makes this case particularly intriguing to researchers is Simonton's character. Neighbors, local officials, and investigators all described him as a level-headed, honest man with no apparent motive for fabricating such an outlandish story. He gained no profit or fame from the incident, and later expressed regret about coming forward, saying the attention had disrupted his work and life. A fragment of the analyzed pancake remains on display at the United States Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, serving as a peculiar reminder of one of the most unusual breakfast encounters in UFO lore. Iris Canti of Milan refers to one of Italy's most famous mediumistic painters, whose extraordinary claims about supernatural artistic possession sparked decades of debate about the authenticity of paranormal creativity. Born in early 20th century Italy, Iris Canti lived an unremarkable life until June 21, 1948, when she experienced what she described as a profound spiritual revelation. Despite having no formal artistic training and admittedly lacking any drawing ability, Canti suddenly found herself compelled to create intricate, technically sophisticated artworks while in a trance-like state. What made her case particularly compelling to believers was the bizarre circumstances surrounding her artistic process. Canti claimed that different spiritual entities would possess each of her hands, creating distinct artistic styles depending on which entity was in control. She would often paint completely upside down, only discovering the true meaning of her work when the canvas was flipped to its correct orientation. The paintings themselves displayed a level of technical skill that seemed impossible for someone with no artistic background. Professional painters who examined her work admitted they were baffled by the quality and complexity of the pieces, stating they could not have been created by someone without extensive training. Concerned about her mental state, Canti consulted renowned neurologist Professor Cesare Clivio, who confirmed she showed no signs of psychological disorders. In her later years, Canti lived in a small Milan apartment surrounded by hundreds of her mysterious paintings, which she refused to sell except to close friends. She eventually stopped creating mediumistic art, but continued receiving messages through automatic writing, claiming her spiritual guides still communicated with her regularly. The conspiracy surrounding Iris Canti centers on whether her abilities represented genuine supernatural phenomena or an elaborate decades-long deception. Skeptics argue that her lack of artistic training could have been exaggerated, or that she unconsciously developed skills through repetitive practice while believing herself to be in a trance. Others suggest the technical quality of her work proves some form of fraud must have been involved, though no definitive evidence of deception was ever uncovered. Her case remains one of the most documented examples of alleged mediumistic art, with her paintings serving as physical evidence in the ongoing debate between paranormal believers and scientific skeptics about the possibility of spirit-guided creativity. This entry suggests that the Hebrew deity Yahweh possesses draconic characteristics that have been deliberately obscured in modern translations. The theory centers on specific Hebrew words found throughout biblical texts that theorists claim reveal serpentine or dragon-like attributes of the divine. The Hebrew word tannin appears over 20 times in Scripture, typically translated as whale or sea monster in English versions. However, this same word directly translates to dragon in numerous ancient sources. Biblical passages describing Yahweh's dwelling place use terminology that conspiracy theorists argue points to dragon imagery. Isaiah chapter 27 describes Yahweh slaying Leviathan the piercing serpent and the dragon that is in the sea. Yet some interpretations suggest this represents not conquest over a separate entity, but rather a description of divine nature itself. The Book of Job contains detailed descriptions of creatures like Behemoth and Leviathan that theorists claim serve as metaphorical self-portraits rather than separate beasts. These passages include anatomical details about fire-breathing, impenetrable scales, and supernatural strength that align with classical dragon characteristics. Hebrew scholar Michael Heiser's work on the Divine Council has inadvertently provided ammunition for this theory. His research into plural references for deity in Hebrew texts reveals instances where Yahweh is described using terminology typically reserved for ancient Near Eastern dragon gods. Archaeological discoveries in the Levant have uncovered numerous Bronze Age artifacts depicting serpentine deities with characteristics matching biblical descriptions of Yahweh's manifestations. The Nehushtan, a bronze serpent Moses created in Numbers chapter 21, remained in the Jerusalem temple for over 700 years before King Hezekiah destroyed it. Translation committees since the 1600s have consistently chosen words like great fish or sea creature when more literal renderings would use dragon. This pattern extends across multiple ancient manuscripts and suggests coordinated editorial decisions to distance the text from draconic imagery. Colonel Corso's thesis refers to the explosive claims made by Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso in his 1997 book, The Day After Roswell. This wasn't just another UFO memoir from a random witness. Corso served 21 years in military intelligence, worked on President Eisenhower's National Security Council, and headed the Army's Foreign Technology Desk at Research and Development. According to Corso, he personally managed the reverse engineering of extraterrestrial artifacts recovered from the Roswell crash in 1947. But here's where it gets interesting. Rather than keeping this technology locked away in some underground bunker, Corso claims he deliberately seeded alien materials to major American corporations like Bell Labs, IBM, and Hughes Aircraft. The seeding process was surprisingly mundane. Corso would approach companies already working on similar technologies and present the alien artifacts as recently acquired foreign technology, without revealing their true origin. The corporations were told they could patent whatever they managed to reverse engineer. The list of technologies Corso attributes to alien reverse engineering reads like a catalog of modern civilization. Fiber optic cables came from studying hair-thin filaments found in the crashed spacecraft. Integrated circuit chips were developed from examining the craft's control panels. Night vision technology emerged from analyzing the large black eyes of the recovered extraterrestrial beings. Kevlar body armor was based on the super-strong materials used in alien spacesuits. Even laser technology allegedly originated from handheld devices found within the wreckage. Corso goes further, claiming the Strategic Defense Initiative, commonly known as Star Wars, wasn't just about stopping Soviet missiles. According to his thesis, it was America's first line of defense against ongoing extraterrestrial incursions. He insisted humanity was essentially at war with these visitors and that Reagan's space-based defense system successfully concluded this conflict in Earth's favor. Perhaps most disturbing were Corso's observations about the recovered beings themselves. After witnessing autopsies, he concluded the so-called gray aliens weren't actually aliens at all, but sophisticated biological robots. These entities had no digestive systems and appeared electronically interfaced with their spacecraft controls, leading Corso to theorize they were engineered specifically for long-distance space travel. The timing of Corso's revelations adds another layer of intrigue. He published his book exactly 50 years after Roswell, then died of a sudden heart attack just months later. His military credentials were impeccable. He had arranged safe passage for 10,000 Jewish refugees during World War II, served as chief of U.S. counterintelligence in Rome, and later worked directly under General Arthur Trudeau, one of the Army's most respected leaders. What makes Corso's thesis particularly compelling is its specificity. Rather than vague claims about government cover-ups, he provides names, dates, companies, and detailed technical descriptions that can be cross-referenced with actual patent filings and corporate development timelines from the 1950s and 60s. The Holy Grail is evil suggests that Christianity's most sacred relic carries a dark curse rather than divine blessing. According to this theory, the cup that supposedly caught Christ's blood at the crucifixion was tainted by the very act of betrayal and violence that led to his death. Some versions claim the Grail absorbs the life force of those who drink from it, granting temporary power while slowly draining their humanity. Medieval accounts describe knights on Grail quests experiencing madness, obsession, and moral corruption. The theory points to historical figures like the Knights Templar, who allegedly discovered the Grail's true nature and were destroyed for trying to warn others. Modern variations suggest the Grail functions as a spiritual parasite, feeding on human devotion and faith. Each person who seeks it becomes more consumed by greed and ambition, explaining why no pure-hearted individual has ever successfully claimed it. The Fisher King legend takes on sinister meaning in this interpretation. Rather than a wounded guardian protecting the Grail, he becomes its first victim, trapped in eternal suffering as punishment for touching the cursed vessel. Some researchers note that every historical location claimed to house the Grail has eventually fallen to war, plague, or mysterious disasters. The Abbey of Glastonbury, Rosslyn Chapel, and various European cathedrals all experienced unexplained tragedies after Grail legends emerged. The theory suggests that organized religion has spent centuries covering up the Grail's malevolent nature, using the quest as a way to eliminate potential threats and maintain control over the faithful. Coin spraying refers to the alleged practice of coating currency with microscopic tracking compounds or behavioral modification substances before releasing it into circulation. According to this theory, government agencies and corporate entities systematically treat paper money and coins with specialized chemical cocktails designed to monitor population movements or influence psychological states. The substances supposedly remain undetectable to casual observation while maintaining their properties for weeks or months. Believers point to the unusual metallic taste some people report after handling large amounts of cash, particularly newer bills. They claim this indicates the presence of lithium-based compounds or synthetic pheromones designed to promote compliance and reduce aggressive behavior in the general population. The theory gained traction in the early 2010s when several online forums began documenting cases of individuals experiencing drowsiness or mild euphoria after extended cash-handling sessions at banks and retail establishments. Some accounts describe bank tellers developing unexplained skin reactions on their fingertips, allegedly from prolonged exposure to treated currency. Proponents of this theory often reference a 1970s declassified document mentioning research into economic behavioral modification through environmental contamination. While the document exists, its actual content involves studying how environmental factors affect spending habits, not chemical manipulation of currency. The technical logistics would require coordination between multiple federal agencies, currency printing facilities, and distribution networks. Each bill would need individual treatment with compounds stable enough to survive the printing process, yet active enough to affect human neurology through brief skin contact. Some variations of the theory suggest that different denominations receive different chemical treatments, with higher value bills allegedly containing more potent tracking elements due to their longer circulation periods and more limited distribution patterns. BP spills corporate warfare refers to the theory that major oil disasters involving British Petroleum were not accidents, but deliberate acts of corporate sabotage designed to destabilize competitors and manipulate global energy markets. The centerpiece of this theory focuses on the Deepwater Horizon disaster in 2010. Rather than viewing this as equipment failure, theorists point to suspicious timing coinciding with proposed offshore drilling expansions by rival companies. The explosion occurred just weeks before congressional hearings on new drilling permits that would have benefited ExxonMobil and Shell. Theorists highlight the unusually rapid response from cleanup companies that had positioned equipment in the Gulf of Mexico days before the explosion. Boots and Coots, a well control specialist, had moved specialized capping equipment to New Orleans 3 days prior to the disaster. This company happened to be owned by Halliburton, the same contractor responsible for the cement work on the failed well. The theory extends beyond single incidents to encompass a pattern of strategic spills. The Exxon Valdez disaster in 1989 allegedly served as a blueprint, demonstrating how environmental catastrophes could reshape public opinion and regulatory frameworks while eliminating smaller competitors unable to absorb massive cleanup costs. Financial records show unusual trading activity in BP stock options in the weeks leading up to Deepwater Horizon. Short positions increased by 400%, suggesting some traders anticipated the company's stock collapse. Similar patterns emerged before the Texas City refinery explosion in 2005 and the Alaska pipeline spills throughout the 2000s. Corporate warfare theorists argue that these disasters function as economic weapons, allowing major players to acquire distressed assets, secure favorable government contracts, and eliminate regulatory obstacles through crisis-driven policy changes. The billion-dollar cleanup contracts inevitably flow to the same network of connected corporations, creating profit from apparent disasters. Grim trigger social engineering refers to a theoretical behavioral control system that leverages game theory principles to create population-wide conditioning mechanisms. The strategy borrows its name from the mathematical concept developed by economist James Friedman in 1971, but applies it to large-scale social manipulation rather than simple economic transactions. The core premise involves establishing invisible behavioral boundaries within society, where any individual who crosses a predetermined threshold faces permanent exclusion from cooperation networks. Unlike traditional punishment systems that offer redemption paths, grim trigger social engineering operates on the principle of irreversible consequences for single infractions. Researchers studying this phenomenon point to several suspected applications in modern society. Financial institutions allegedly employ grim trigger protocols through credit scoring systems that permanently blacklist individuals for minor violations, regardless of subsequent rehabilitation efforts. Social media platforms reportedly use similar algorithms that shadow ban users who engage in specific behaviors, cutting them off from organic reach without clear appeals processes. The most concerning aspect involves the psychological conditioning component. Behavioral scientists note that when populations understand they face permanent consequences for single mistakes, they develop heightened compliance patterns and self-censorship behaviors. This creates what some researchers call manufactured conformity, where people modify their actions not based on personal values, but on fear of triggering irreversible punishment. Documentation from leaked corporate training materials in the 2010s revealed explicit references to grim trigger methodologies in customer retention programs. These protocols involved identifying customers who complained or requested refunds and permanently flagging them for reduced service quality, effectively conditioning entire customer bases to avoid asserting their rights. Intelligence analysts have identified similar patterns in employment screening systems, where applicants face permanent exclusion from entire industry sectors based on single incidents or associations. The interconnected nature of background check databases means that one company's grim trigger decision becomes industry-wide enforcement. The social engineering element becomes particularly sophisticated when combined with data harvesting operations. By tracking behavioral patterns across multiple platforms and institutions, operators can implement coordinated grim trigger responses that isolate individuals from employment, housing, financial services, and social networks simultaneously. Critics argue that grim trigger social engineering represents a fundamental shift from rehabilitation-based systems to permanent caste creation, where single mistakes or dissenting opinions result in lifelong marginalization from mainstream society. This entry claims that the United States and European Union work together to deliberately manipulate global weather patterns and climate systems for economic and political advantage. The theory centers around weather modification technologies that supposedly allow these powers to create droughts, floods, hurricanes, and extreme temperatures in targeted regions. The High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, known as HAARP, frequently appears in these discussions as a key tool for atmospheric manipulation. Located in Alaska, this research facility uses radio waves to heat portions of the ionosphere, which believers claim can redirect jet streams and alter precipitation patterns thousands of kilometers away. Geoengineering programs provide another focal point for these claims. Stratospheric aerosol injection, marine cloud brightening, and solar radiation management represent real scientific concepts being researched by institutions in both America and Europe. However, the conspiracy suggests these aren't just research projects, but active operations designed to weaken developing nations economically while strengthening Western agricultural and energy sectors. The carbon credit system draws particular scrutiny in this theory. By controlling both the climate and the regulations around climate change, the USA and EU supposedly create artificial scarcity and abundance cycles that force other nations into economic dependence. When droughts devastate crops in Africa or Asia, Western agricultural exports become essential. When floods damage infrastructure, Western engineering companies profit from reconstruction contracts. Believers point to historical weather modification programs like Operation Popeye during the Vietnam War, where American forces extended monsoon seasons to disrupt enemy supply lines. They argue this proves the technology exists and has been weaponized before. The theory gained momentum during the 2010s as extreme weather events increased globally, with some attributing unusual storm patterns and temperature swings to coordinated intervention rather than natural climate change. This entry claims that David Koresh, the leader of the Branch Davidians religious group, did not perish during the 1993 siege at Waco, Texas, and remains alive to this day. David Vernon Howell, who later changed his name to David Koresh, led the Branch Davidians from their Mount Carmel compound near Waco. The 51-day standoff with federal agents ended on April 19, 1993, when the compound burned during a final assault. Official reports stated that Koresh died from a gunshot wound to the head. Believers in Koresh's survival point to several inconsistencies in the official narrative. The body identified as Koresh was reportedly found in a concrete bunker room, but forensic experts noted the remains were severely damaged by fire, making positive identification challenging. The autopsy revealed a gunshot wound, but some question whether this occurred before or during the fire. Several former Branch Davidians who survived the siege have made cryptic statements over the years suggesting their leader had escape plans. Ruth Riddle, one of the survivors, mentioned in interviews that Koresh had spoken about underground tunnels beneath the compound, though authorities claim no such tunnels were found during the investigation. The most compelling evidence cited by conspiracy researchers involves alleged sightings of Koresh in various locations throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s. A man matching his description was reportedly seen at a gas station in Amarillo, Texas, just months after the Waco incident. The witness, truck driver Marcus Wellington, claimed the individual had distinctive scars on his hands that matched known injuries Koresh sustained during his youth. Additional fuel for this theory comes from financial records, showing that several offshore accounts linked to Branch Davidian funds remained active for years after the siege, with withdrawals occurring as late as 1998. Some researchers also point to the timing of the final assault, suggesting Koresh had advance warning and used pre-established escape routes while body doubles or other casualties were left behind to create the illusion of his death. This entry suggests that humans were the very first life form to emerge on Earth, predating all other organisms by millions or even billions of years. The theory flips evolutionary biology completely upside down. Instead of humans evolving from simpler life forms over millions of years, believers claim we were the original template from which all other life descended. Some versions propose that early humans possessed advanced genetic manipulation abilities, essentially designing and creating every other species on the planet. Supporters point to what they call gaps in the fossil record, arguing that the sudden appearance of complex life forms during events like the Cambrian explosion makes more sense if humans were already present to engineer these organisms. They claim mainstream paleontology has deliberately hidden or misinterpreted fossil evidence showing human artifacts in rock layers that predate accepted timelines by hundreds of millions of years. The most extreme versions incorporate ideas about cyclical civilizations, suggesting that technologically advanced human societies have risen and fallen multiple times throughout Earth's history. Each collapse supposedly wiped out most evidence of human presence, leaving only scattered traces that get dismissed by conventional science. Proponents often cite anomalous archaeological findings like the supposed hammer found in Ordovician rock in Texas, or alleged human footprints alongside dinosaur tracks in the Paluxy River. They argue these discoveries prove humans and dinosaurs coexisted, supporting their timeline where humans came first. This theory requires rejecting fundamental principles of geology, biology, and physics. The established understanding shows life beginning with simple single-celled organisms roughly 3.5 billion years ago, gradually increasing in complexity through natural selection and genetic mutation. The lack of human fossils in ancient rock layers, the clear evolutionary relationships shown through DNA analysis, and the step-by-step progression of complexity in the fossil record all contradict this human-first scenario. Jellyfish saturation refers to the theory that global jellyfish populations are being artificially inflated through deliberate environmental manipulation to serve hidden agendas. Starting in the early 2010s, marine biologists began documenting massive jellyfish blooms occurring with unprecedented frequency across the world's oceans. Japan's Nomura jellyfish, normally appearing once every 40 years, suddenly began showing up annually. These 6-foot-wide gelatinous masses didn't just disrupt fishing operations, they clogged intake pipes at nuclear power plants and even caused fishing vessels to capsize under their sheer weight. While mainstream science points to agricultural runoff and warming oceans as the culprit, supporters of this theory argue the timing and scale suggest something far more deliberate. The agricultural runoff explanation becomes suspicious when you consider how precisely timed these blooms appear near critical infrastructure. Power plants and desalination facilities from Japan to the Middle East have been repeatedly shut down by these so-called natural events. The theory gains traction from the scientific community's own admissions. Researchers openly acknowledge they're still struggling to answer basic questions about jellyfish populations and biomass. A 2012 international task force found a concerning lack of information about jellyfish bloom patterns despite their obvious global impact. This knowledge gap provides perfect cover for any coordinated manipulation. Dr. Rebecca Helm's research at the University of North Carolina revealed that jellyfish reproduction can be triggered by specific chemical combinations in seawater. Agricultural fertilizers containing precise ratios of nitrogen and phosphorus create ideal spawning conditions. The theory suggests these aren't accidental agricultural accidents, but carefully orchestrated releases designed to weaponize marine ecosystems. The most compelling evidence comes from the pattern of affected regions. Countries experiencing jellyfish saturation often coincide with geopolitical tensions or resource disputes. The South China Sea, already a flashpoint for territorial conflicts, has seen some of the most dramatic jellyfish population explosions. Meanwhile, nations with advanced aquaculture programs seem mysteriously unaffected by the worst blooms. Consider the strategic implications. Jellyfish effectively create marine dead zones, driving away commercial fish species and rendering large ocean areas economically useless. These creatures are notoriously difficult to study, making it nearly impossible to prove artificial intervention. They leave no fingerprints, require no ongoing maintenance, and reproduce exponentially once established. The saturation theory also explains why conventional solutions consistently fail. Killing jellyfish actually makes the problem worse, as dead specimens release eggs that create new spawning areas. This biological failsafe ensures that any attempt to combat the blooms only accelerates their spread. Recent developments in marine biotechnology have made targeted jellyfish cultivation increasingly feasible. Companies like Marine Biodynamics have patents for controlled jellyfish breeding systems that can produce specific species in massive quantities. Their client list remains classified, hidden behind multiple shell corporations and defense contracts. The ultimate goal remains unclear. Some suggest it's environmental warfare designed to cripple coastal economies. Others believe it's preparation for large-scale ocean farming operations, clearing traditional marine life to make room for more controllable aquaculture. The most unsettling possibility is that jellyfish saturation serves as a testing ground for broader biological weapons deployment. Whatever the purpose, the evidence suggests our oceans are becoming increasingly saturated with these ancient predators, and the timing feels far too convenient to be entirely natural. The Televangelist bombers refers to an unsolved criminal case that targeted some of America's most prominent religious television personalities in 1990. An unknown perpetrator mailed sophisticated pipe bombs to Televangelist headquarters, leaving investigators with more questions than answers for over 3 decades. The first attack occurred on January 30th, 1990, when a package arrived at Lakewood Church in Houston, Texas. The church was run by Pastor John Osteen, father of current megachurch leader Joel Osteen. When John's daughter Lisa Combs opened what appeared to be routine mail, the device exploded, leaving her with third-degree burns across her right leg and abdomen. 3 months later, the bomber struck again, this time targeting Pat Robertson's Christian Broadcasting Network headquarters in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Security guard Scott Sheepers nearly lost his life when he handled the suspicious package, which contained the same type of improvised explosive device. Criminal profilers developed a composite of the mail delivery suspect, a well-dressed white male between 5'10" and 6 feet tall, weighing 160 to 175 pounds with brown hair. By 1991, investigators estimated he was between 28 and 35 years old. Despite the detailed description and nationwide manhunt, the bomber vanished without a trace. The case took on deeper intrigue when investigators noticed similarities between these devices and bombs used by Walter Moody, who was later convicted of targeting federal judges and civil rights lawyers. However, authorities could never definitively link Moody to the Televangelist attacks, leaving open the possibility of a copycat or entirely different perpetrator. More recently, some investigators have suggested Eric Rudolph, the Olympic Park bomber who terrorized Atlanta in 1996, might have been responsible for the earlier attacks. Rudolph lived in North Carolina during the Televangelist bombings, matched the physical description perfectly, and his later explosive devices showed remarkably similar construction techniques. His documented hatred of what he considered false Christianity and religious materialism would align with targeting prosperity gospel preachers. The bomber seemed to specifically choose televangelists known for their controversial fundraising methods and lavish lifestyles, suggesting someone with intimate knowledge of religious broadcasting scandals. Both John Osteen and Pat Robertson had faced criticism for their prosperity gospel teachings and requests for viewer donations. What makes this case particularly unsettling is the bomber's apparent technical sophistication and careful target selection, combined with their complete disappearance from law enforcement radar. The attacks stopped as suddenly as they began, leaving behind only physical evidence and a chilling reminder that even those claiming divine protection remained vulnerable to very human threats. This entry suggests that Bugs Bunny represents more than just animated entertainment, specifically that the character embodies a Native American trickster spirit deliberately woven into mainstream media. The theory centers on the rabbit as a sacred trickster figure across numerous Native American traditions. In Lakota culture, the rabbit spirit Iktomi appears as a clever shapeshifter who outsmarts larger, more powerful opponents through wit rather than strength. Cherokee stories feature Rabbit as a cunning hero who uses humor and intelligence to overcome seemingly impossible odds. Bugs Bunny displays remarkably similar characteristics to these traditional trickster spirits. He consistently defeats larger adversaries like Elmer Fudd and Yosemite Sam through elaborate schemes and supernatural-seeming abilities. His famous catchphrase, "What's up, Doc?" mirrors the casual, irreverent attitude typical of trickster figures who show little respect for authority or social hierarchy. The timing raises additional questions. Warner Brothers created Bugs Bunny in 1938, during an era when Hollywood frequently borrowed from indigenous cultures without acknowledgement. Tex Avery and Bob Clampett, key developers of the character, both spent time in the American Southwest, where they would have encountered Native American folklore. Some point to specific episodes where Bugs demonstrates shamanic-like abilities, appearing and disappearing at will, surviving impossible situations, and seeming to bend reality itself. His home in underground tunnels connects to earth-based spirituality common in many tribal traditions. The white gloves and anthropomorphic design may have served as a buffer, making the appropriation less obvious to mainstream audiences while preserving the essential trickster spirit that made the character compelling across cultures. Carnophallogocentrism refers to a fringe academic theory that claims Western civilization operates on three interconnected pillars of dominance that most people never recognize as linked together. The theory suggests that meat consumption, masculine authority, and the prioritization of spoken word over written text form a secret trinity that has shaped human society for thousands of years. According to this framework, these three elements don't just coexist by coincidence, but actively reinforce each other in ways that maintain existing power structures. The meat-eating component argues that consuming animal flesh creates a psychological conditioning toward dominance and violence. Theorists point to how cultures with heavy meat consumption historically became more militaristic and expansionist. The masculine authority element focuses on how patriarchal systems embed themselves through language and ritual, while the logocentrism aspect deals with how spoken authority has traditionally held more weight than written documentation in legal and religious contexts. Jacques Derrida's work on logocentrism provides the philosophical foundation, though he never explicitly connected it to dietary habits or gender dynamics. Carol J. Adams later linked meat-eating to masculine dominance in her 1990 writings, but the full three-part theory didn't emerge until certain academic circles in the early 2000s began drawing these connections together. The conspiracy element comes from claims that major institutions deliberately promote this trinity. Theorists point to how government dietary guidelines, educational curricula, and media representation all supposedly work together to maintain these three pillars without people realizing the deeper connection. Critics argue the theory cherry-picks evidence and creates connections where none exist, but supporters claim this dismissal proves how deeply embedded the system really is. The Human Genome Project defunding theory centers on the abrupt redirection of resources from what was supposed to be humanity's greatest genetic mapping endeavor. The project, launched in 1990 with a projected completion date of 2005, suddenly announced its completion 2 years ahead of schedule in 2003. The conspiracy suggests this wasn't scientific breakthrough, but damage control. According to this theory, researchers discovered genetic markers that contradicted fundamental assumptions about human evolution and origin. These findings allegedly included evidence of genetic tampering from an unknown source, with DNA sequences that couldn't be explained through natural selection or random mutation. The most compelling claim involves the so-called junk DNA findings. While mainstream science labeled 98% of human genetic material as non-functional, conspiracy theorists point to internal communications suggesting this genetic material contained structured information that resembled coded instructions. When scientists began deciphering these patterns, funding supposedly dried up overnight. Francis Collins, who led the project's final years, reportedly received pressure from undisclosed government agencies to conclude the research and transfer all data to classified databases. The theory claims that instead of making the complete human genetic blueprint publicly available as promised, only a sanitized version reached the scientific community. Several key researchers allegedly left the project under mysterious circumstances between 2001 and 2003. Dr. Craig Venter, whose private company competed with the government project, supposedly discovered genetic anomalies that suggested human DNA had been artificially enhanced at some point in history. His sudden shift away from genome research to focus on synthetic biology is cited as evidence of deliberate misdirection. The defunding theory also encompasses the peculiar fate of the project's databases. While officials claimed complete transparency, researchers attempting to access certain genetic sequences found them classified or simply missing from public records. Independent scientists who questioned these gaps reportedly faced funding cuts for their own research projects. Some versions of this theory connect the Genome Project's premature conclusion to the emergence of 21st century genetic engineering programs, suggesting the real discoveries were moved into black budget operations focused on human enhancement and biological warfare applications. CN psyops refers to the belief that Cartoon Network deliberately embeds psychological operations within their programming to influence young viewers' minds and behavior patterns. The theory centers around the idea that seemingly innocent animated shows contain sophisticated subliminal messaging designed to alter children's thought processes. Theorists point to specific visual techniques like rapid color flashing, hidden symbols embedded in background art, and carefully timed audio cues that supposedly bypass conscious awareness. The most cited example involves the show Ed, Edd and Eddy, where conspiracy theorists claim certain episodes contain frame-by-frame imagery that appears for less than 1/24th of a second. These allegedly include geometric patterns and symbols that some believe trigger specific neurological responses in developing brains. Another focal point is Courage the Cowardly Dog, which theorists argue uses deliberate psychological horror elements not just for entertainment, but to desensitize children to fear and anxiety. They claim the show's surreal imagery and disturbing character designs serve as a form of controlled trauma exposure. The supposed methods include something called hypnotic programming, where repetitive visual patterns and specific color combinations allegedly induce trance-like states in young viewers. Theorists point to the way certain Cartoon Network shows use spiraling animations, checkerboard patterns, and alternating black and white sequences. Some versions of this theory suggest the network coordinates with government agencies to study childhood psychological development through viewing data and behavioral analysis. They claim that certain experimental episodes were aired in limited markets to test different psychological manipulation techniques. The conspiracy gained traction in online forums during the 2010s, particularly after former animators began discussing the intense psychological research that studios sometimes conduct to maximize viewer engagement and retention. Privately owned nuclear weapons refers to the claim that certain wealthy individuals and private corporations possess functional nuclear devices outside of government oversight. The theory centers on the idea that during the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, numerous nuclear warheads went missing from military stockpiles. Official records acknowledge that several hundred tactical nuclear weapons were unaccounted for during this chaotic period, but most intelligence agencies maintain these were eventually recovered or destroyed. However, declassified documents from the International Atomic Energy Agency reveal that at least 47 nuclear devices remained missing as of 1998. The theory suggests that arms dealers connected to organized crime syndicates managed to acquire these weapons and sell them to private buyers with sufficient resources. One frequently cited case involves a mysterious transaction in 1994, where Swiss banking records show a payment of $200 million to an unnamed Russian military official. The payment originated from a shell company linked to a prominent industrialist whose identity remains classified in most government files. The technical challenges of maintaining nuclear weapons privately adds another layer to this conspiracy. Nuclear warheads require regular maintenance, including tritium replacement every 12 to 15 years to remain functional. This has led some researchers to speculate that certain private laboratories conducting legitimate nuclear research may be serving dual purposes. A former nuclear engineer who worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory claimed in testimony before Congress that the specialized equipment needed for nuclear weapon maintenance could easily be disguised within existing industrial facilities. He specifically mentioned that centrifuge technology used in medical isotope production shares significant overlap with weapons-grade uranium processing. The implications extend beyond simple possession. Some versions of this theory suggest that private nuclear ownership serves as the ultimate insurance policy for ultra-wealthy individuals, providing leverage against government interference in their business operations. Others claim these weapons are held in reserve by shadow organizations preparing for societal collapse scenarios. Weiteislehre, also known as world ice theory, claimed that ice was the fundamental building block of the entire universe. Austrian engineer Hans Herbiger developed this theory in the early 1900s, proposing that cosmic ice played the central role in all astronomical phenomena. According to Herbiger, the Milky Way formed when a massive ice block collided with a giant star, creating an explosion that scattered ice throughout space. He insisted that most planets, moons, and celestial bodies consisted primarily of ice rather than rock or gas. The moon, in his view, was essentially a giant ice ball orbiting Earth. The theory extended beyond simple composition claims. Herbiger argued that Earth had captured and destroyed multiple ice moons throughout history, with each collision causing catastrophic floods and ice ages. He believed these cosmic ice impacts explained major geological changes and even influenced human evolution. What made this theory particularly notable was its adoption by certain political movements in Germany during the 1930s and 40s. Some Nazi officials promoted world ice theory as an alternative to mainstream astronomy, viewing it as distinctly Germanic science. Herbiger himself claimed his theory came to him in a vision rather than through conventional scientific research. The theory predicted that our current moon would eventually spiral into Earth, causing another ice catastrophe. Herbiger also claimed that weather patterns, earthquakes, and volcanic activity all resulted from cosmic ice influences. Despite gaining political support, world ice theory contradicted virtually every established principle of physics and astronomy. The scientific community rejected it completely, noting that basic observations through telescopes disproved its core claims about planetary composition. Herbiger died in 1931, but his followers continued promoting the theory for decades, establishing institutes and publishing materials well into the mid-20th century. Garmonbozia Chronochrome refers to a proposed connection between emotional energy harvesting and temporal color manipulation that emerged from fringe research communities in the late 2010s. The theory suggests that certain frequencies of human suffering produce a measurable chromatic signature that exists outside normal time perception. Researchers claim this phenomenon was first documented in the Pacific Northwest during the 1990s, where unusual electromagnetic readings coincided with reports of temporal distortions and unexplained color shifts in photographs. According to this framework, emotional pain generates what theorists call chronochrome particles, subatomic units that carry both temporal and chromatic information. These particles allegedly allow for the extraction and storage of suffering as a form of energy currency. The connection draws from reports of individuals experiencing synesthetic episodes where emotional trauma manifests as specific color patterns that seem to move backward through time. Witnesses describe seeing deep red and black geometrical forms that appear to consume lighter colors from their peripheral vision. Several independent researchers have documented cases where digital cameras capture color anomalies in locations with documented histories of psychological distress. The images show bands of color that appear to flow in reverse chronological order when viewed frame by frame. The most compelling evidence cited involves a series of experiments conducted in abandoned psychiatric facilities between 2008 and 2012. Investigators claim their equipment registered chromatic shifts that corresponded directly with historical records of patient trauma, suggesting that emotional events leave permanent color impressions in space-time. Critics point out that no peer-reviewed studies have validated these claims, and the chromatic anomalies could result from equipment malfunction or environmental factors. However, supporters maintain that mainstream science lacks the instruments necessary to detect chronochrome phenomena. The theory gained renewed attention when several independent filmmakers reported similar color distortions while documenting locations with dark histories, leading to speculation about whether certain geographic areas retain emotional imprints that manifest as temporal color bleeding. Original Cotton Eye Joe refers to the dark theories surrounding one of America's most enduring folk songs and what its true origins might reveal about hidden history. Most people know Cotton Eye Joe from the 1990s dance hit by Rednecks, but the song traces back centuries through American folk tradition. The conspiracy centers on what the original version actually described and why certain details were deliberately obscured over time. The song tells the story of a mysterious figure named Cotton Eye Joe who arrives in a community, disrupts relationships, and then vanishes. Traditional versions include the refrain, "Where did you come from? Where did you go?" But the earlier verses paint a much darker picture. Some researchers point to documented versions from the 1800s that include references to violence, theft, and community destruction that were gradually sanitized from popular renditions. The Cotton Eye description itself has multiple sinister interpretations. One theory suggests it referred to blindness caused by cotton dust in textile mills, making Joe a figure representing industrial exploitation. Others point to historical accounts where Cotton Eye described the appearance of advanced syphilis, suggesting Joe was spreading disease intentionally. The most controversial interpretation links the song to Civil War-era psychological warfare. Folklorist Alan Lomax documented versions in the 1930s that suggested Cotton Eye Joe was a code name for Union spies or agitators who would infiltrate Confederate communities, gather intelligence, and disappear. Military historians note that several documented Union operatives used similar tactics of romantic entanglement to extract information before vanishing, leaving behind social chaos that weakened community bonds. What makes this theory compelling is how the song's structure mirrors intelligence reports from the period. The repetitive questioning format matches interrogation techniques, while the emphasis on Joe's sudden arrival and departure follows documented spy protocols. Whether Cotton Eye Joe represents a real historical figure, a composite of multiple operatives, or simply evolved from darker folk traditions, remains hotly debated among conspiracy researchers who believe the truth was intentionally buried beneath generations of innocent dance music. This entry suggests that Jesus Christ was not born in Bethlehem, but rather somewhere in what is now the state of Texas. The theory challenges 2,000 years of Christian tradition by claiming that biblical translations and historical records have deliberately obscured the true birthplace of Christianity's central figure. Supporters of this idea point to linguistic similarities between ancient Aramaic place names and locations throughout Texas. They claim that Bethlehem was a mistranslation or intentional misdirection, and that the actual birthplace corresponds to an area in central Texas. Some versions of the theory specifically point to Bethlehem, Texas, a small unincorporated community, as evidence of preserved historical memory. The theory often involves claims about ancient Middle Eastern peoples reaching North America thousands of years before commonly accepted timelines. Proponents cite alleged archaeological discoveries of ancient Hebrew inscriptions found in Texas caves and rock formations, though mainstream archaeology has not validated these findings. Certain versions incorporate the Phoenicians and their advanced seafaring capabilities, suggesting they established trade routes and settlements across the Atlantic Ocean centuries before the birth of Christ. These theorists claim that Jewish communities fled persecution and established new settlements in the Americas, where significant religious figures were later born. Some adherents point to geographic similarities between the Texas Hill Country and the traditional Holy Land, arguing that early Christian writers simply transposed familiar landscape descriptions onto Middle Eastern locations. They note the presence of natural springs, rolling hills, and desert-like conditions in parts of Texas that mirror biblical descriptions. The theory occasionally intersects with claims about the lost tribes of Israel, suggesting that these groups migrated to North America and maintained their religious traditions independently from Old World Judaism and early Christianity. More elaborate versions include assertions about Spanish conquistadors discovering evidence of pre-Columbian Christian communities in Texas and deliberately suppressing these findings to maintain European religious authority. This entry refers to Pyrosalamandera. A lesser-known cryptid theory, Pyrosalamandera is said to be a fire-dwelling amphibian, an impossible contradiction by biological standards. Unlike typical salamanders, which are drawn to damp, cool environments, Pyrosalamandera is allegedly attracted to extreme heat. The creature is often linked to volcanic regions, particularly in rural parts of Iceland and Java, where locals claim to have seen glowing, ember-like forms slithering across lava fields. Eyewitness accounts describe it as roughly the size of a house cat, with a coal-black hide and flickering red lines running down its body, similar to cracks in burning wood. According to some field notes from mid-20th century researchers, mostly self-funded naturalists, the creature can survive direct contact with open flame and even submerge itself in molten rock. One report from 1963 mentions a group of scientists in Hokkaido who supposedly tried to trap a Pyrosalamandera near an active lava flow. Their equipment was found melted, with no signs of the creature. The name likely comes from a fusion of pyro, meaning fire, and salamandra, the Latin word for salamander. It's worth noting that the term salamander has a long history in mythology as a fire spirit, which may have helped fuel this modern theory. Skeptics argue that the entire concept is a misinterpretation of heat mirages, gas flare reflections, or just cooked-up folklore. But a few fringe zoologists have proposed that Pyrosalamandera could be a heat-resistant extremophile, some unknown branch of life with built-in insulation, like natural ceramic plating or heat-repellent mucus. No physical evidence exists. No bones, no samples, no credible photos. But that hasn't stopped amateur trackers from hiking into volcanic zones, hoping to spot what they call the fire lizard that science forgot. God from Four Corners refers to a theological conspiracy theory suggesting that divine presence operates through specific geometric patterns tied to the cardinal directions of Earth. This theory draws from biblical passages mentioning the four corners of the earth, particularly Isaiah chapter 11 verse 12 and Revelation chapter 7 verse 1. Believers claim these aren't metaphorical references, but literal descriptions of how divine energy flows across the planet. The core idea centers on ancient Hebrew cosmology, where Earth was understood as a flat disk with four distinct corners corresponding to north, south, east, and west. According to this interpretation, God's power emanates from these cardinal points, creating invisible energy lines that crisscross the globe. Supporters point to the Hebrew word kanaf, used in original biblical texts, which can mean both corner and wing. They argue this dual meaning reveals hidden knowledge about how divine presence literally spreads across Earth's surface, like wings extending to its furthest points. The theory gained traction in certain fundamentalist circles during the 1990s when Pastor Harold Camping began teaching that God's judgment would come from these four directions simultaneously. Camping claimed that understanding this pattern was crucial for interpreting biblical prophecy. Modern versions of this theory often incorporate claims about ancient monuments and sacred sites being positioned at specific coordinates that align with these supposed divine energy points. The Great Pyramid of Giza, Stonehenge, and various Native American burial mounds are frequently cited as evidence of ancient civilizations understanding this cosmic arrangement. Some variations suggest that world governments deliberately suppress knowledge of these energy patterns, using them secretly to influence global events while keeping the general population unaware of their spiritual significance. The universal mind is not sane suggests that the cosmic consciousness governing our reality is fundamentally broken or mentally unstable. This theory attempts to explain why existence feels chaotic, contradictory, and often cruel, despite the apparent intelligence behind the universe's design. The concept builds on the idea that consciousness exists at every level of reality, from quantum particles to galactic clusters, all connected through what some call the universal mind or cosmic consciousness. This overarching intelligence supposedly orchestrates the laws of physics, the flow of time, and the interconnected web of all existence. But according to this theory, something went terribly wrong. Believers point to the bizarre nature of quantum mechanics as evidence: particles existing in multiple states simultaneously, effects preceding causes, and the observer effect changing reality just by looking at it. These aren't elegant solutions from a rational cosmic mind, they argue, but the confused ramblings of an unhinged universal consciousness. The theory gained traction through the writings of science fiction author Philip K. Dick, who experienced what he called divine visions in the 1970s. Dick described encountering a vast intelligence he named Valis that seemed both godlike and deeply disturbed. He believed this cosmic mind was trying to repair itself, occasionally breaking through into human consciousness with fragmented messages and reality glitches. Supporters catalog examples of reality's apparent insanity. Why do we age and die when the universe seems capable of creating immortal jellyfish? Why does the speed of light create an arbitrary cosmic speed limit? Why do black holes exist as regions where mathematics breaks down completely? Some connect this to ancient Gnostic texts describing the demiurge, a flawed creator deity who built our world as a broken copy of true reality. Modern interpretations suggest this demiurge isn't a separate being, but rather the universal consciousness itself, corrupted by some primordial trauma or inherent defect. The theory proposes that what we call natural disasters, diseases, and random suffering aren't bugs in the system, but features of a cosmic mind that's lost its sanity. Every glitch in the matrix, every moment of inexplicable synchronicity, and every time reality seems to bend in impossible ways represents the universal consciousness having what amounts to a psychotic episode. Original Doll represents one of pop music's most mysterious suppressed albums, tied directly to theories about industry mind control and the systematic destruction of authentic artistic expression. On December 30th, 2004, Britney Spears made an unannounced appearance at KIIS FM radio station in Los Angeles. She arrived barefoot, carrying only a CD and her chihuahua, completely bypassing her management team. During this impromptu visit, she premiered a haunting track called Mona Lisa from what she described as her upcoming album, Original Doll. The timing of this guerrilla radio appearance was no accident. Spears had just finished her Onyx Hotel tour and was reportedly halfway through completing this secret project. The album was intended to showcase a more personal, honest side of the pop star, featuring songs she had written about her breakup with Justin Timberlake and her growing disillusionment with the music industry machine. Within hours of the broadcast, Jive Records issued a stern denial, claiming no album was scheduled and that Mona Lisa would never receive radio play. Industry insiders later revealed that no signed artist would dare premiere unreleased material without label approval, describing the potential consequences in violent terms. The song itself contained eerily prophetic lyrics about wanting someone to break down and become a legend of their fall. Spears had adopted a Mona Lisa alter ego during this period, singing about freeing her troubled alternate self. Most unsettling were references to being the original and unforgettable, warning listeners that she had been cloned. These lyrical themes take on darker significance when considering that Jive Records was actively seeking Britney Spears types for an upcoming girl group called the Pussycat Dolls. The album title Original Doll appeared to be a deliberate challenge to this replacement strategy, with Spears asserting her authenticity against manufactured copies. The complete suppression of Original Doll preceded Spears' highly publicized breakdown by just 3 years. Some researchers point to this as evidence of systematic psychological pressure applied to silence artists who attempt to break free from corporate control. The fact that only fragments of the project ever surfaced despite being described as halfway complete, suggests deliberate destruction of evidence. The 1890 U.S. Census represents one of the most significant data losses in American government history, though some believe this destruction was far from accidental. On January 10, 1921, a fire swept through the basement of the Commerce Building in Washington, D.C., destroying nearly all records from the 1890 population count. The official story claims faulty wiring caused the blaze, but the timing raises eyebrows among researchers. The 1890 census captured America at a crucial moment. Mass immigration was reshaping the country's demographics, labor strikes were escalating, and tensions over citizenship were reaching a boiling point. This particular census would have contained the most detailed snapshot of who exactly was living in America during this transformative decade. What makes this destruction suspicious is the selective nature of the loss. While 1890 records vanished almost completely, censuses from 1880 and 1900 survived with minimal damage despite being stored in the same facility. The conspiracy suggests that certain powerful interests wanted specific information buried. Immigration records showing the true scale of demographic change, documentation of labor organizing in industrial centers, or evidence of voting irregularities in key states. Some researchers point to the fact that fragments of military and naval personnel records survived the fire, while civilian population data did not. Census taker William Rush Merriam had implemented new counting methods for 1890, including more detailed questions about employment, immigration status, and family origins. The answers to these questions, conspiracy theorists argue, revealed inconvenient truths about American society that needed to disappear. Today, genealogists and historians work with scattered fragments, but the complete picture of America in 1890 remains lost forever. The Mel Lyman family was a secretive commune that operated from the late 1960s through the 1970s, centered around a folk musician who declared himself the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. Mel Lyman started as a harmonica player in the Cambridge folk scene before establishing his group on Fort Hill in Boston. What began as a typical counterculture commune quickly transformed into something far more controlling. Lyman convinced his followers that he was divine, requiring absolute submission to his will and teachings. The group maintained multiple properties, including a compound on Martha's Vineyard, where members lived in isolation from the outside world. Lyman published a newsletter called Avatar, where he made increasingly grandiose claims about his spiritual powers and destiny to save humanity. Former members described a rigid hierarchy where Lyman's inner circle enforced his rules through psychological manipulation and punishment. Children born into the group were separated from their parents and raised communally according to Lyman's philosophy. The commune operated several businesses as fronts, including construction companies and a recording studio. These ventures helped fund their operations while maintaining a legitimate public face. Members were required to turn over all personal possessions and earnings to the group. What makes this case particularly unsettling is how effectively the group avoided outside scrutiny for over a decade. Despite neighbors' complaints and occasional media attention, law enforcement rarely intervened in their activities. The commune gradually dissolved after Lyman's death in 1978, though some members continued living together for years afterward. Many former followers have never spoken publicly about their experiences, maintaining the group's culture of secrecy even decades later. This entry suggests that the very act of consuming food directly accelerates the aging process in humans. The theory centers on the idea that eating creates metabolic waste products and cellular damage that accumulate over time, essentially making every meal a small step toward death. The foundation comes from decades of research on caloric restriction, particularly the work of scientist Roy Walford in the 1970s and 80s. Walford discovered that laboratory mice fed 30 to 40% fewer calories than normal lived up to 50% longer than their well-fed counterparts. These restricted mice also showed fewer age-related diseases, better cognitive function, and maintained youthful appearance much longer. The biological mechanism involves free radicals, unstable molecules created when cells break down food for energy. These molecules damage cellular structures including DNA, proteins, and cell membranes. The more food processed, the more free radicals generated, leading to faster deterioration of the body's systems. Studies extended beyond mice to include monkeys, dogs, and fish, all showing similar life extension benefits from eating less. Some research indicated that intermittent fasting periods allow cellular repair mechanisms called sirtuins to activate, essentially giving the body time to clean up damage before more food creates additional waste. The Calorie Restriction Society, founded in the 1990s, consists of people who voluntarily eat 1,500 to 1,800 calories daily while maintaining proper nutrition. Members undergo regular medical monitoring and report improvements in biomarkers associated with aging, including lower blood pressure, improved cholesterol levels, and reduced inflammation markers. Critics point out that severe caloric restriction can lead to muscle loss, bone density reduction, and social isolation. However, supporters argue that modern humans consume far more calories than necessary for survival, and that our ancestors naturally experienced periods of food scarcity that kept their bodies in optimal repair mode. The California Oxygen Therapy Group did JFK theory suggests that a little-known medical organization based in California played a direct role in the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963. This theory centers around hyperbaric oxygen therapy, a medical treatment where patients breathe pure oxygen in a pressurized chamber. The process was gaining attention in the early 1960s for treating various conditions, from carbon monoxide poisoning to wound healing. According to this conspiracy, the California group had developed advanced oxygen delivery systems that could be weaponized. The theory claims they created a specialized device capable of delivering concentrated oxygen mixed with other substances through modified breathing apparatus. Some versions of this theory point to Kennedy's known back problems and his use of various medical treatments as the entry point. They suggest that someone connected to the oxygen therapy group gained access to the president through medical channels, possibly during one of his many treatments for chronic pain. The most specific claims involve a supposed meeting between group members and individuals later connected to Dallas in the months before the assassination. Proponents point to flight records and hotel registrations in Texas during the summer of 1963. What makes this theory particularly unusual is its focus on medical technology, rather than the typical firearms or explosive theories. It suggests the assassination involved a sophisticated understanding of respiratory systems and oxygen toxicity. The California Oxygen Therapy Group itself was a legitimate organization that published research papers and operated treatment facilities. However, no credible evidence has ever surfaced linking them to any assassination plot, and the group's documented activities during this period show routine medical practice rather than any covert operations. This entry centers on the belief that Osama bin Laden survived the Navy SEAL raid in Abbottabad, Pakistan on May 2, 2011. According to this theory, the official narrative of bin Laden's elimination was an elaborate theatrical production designed to boost President Obama's approval ratings and provide closure to the American public after nearly a decade of hunting the world's most wanted man. Believers point to several supposed inconsistencies in the government's account. The rapid burial at sea, which officials claimed followed Islamic tradition, struck many as suspiciously convenient for disposing of evidence. No photographs of the body were released to the public, with the administration citing concerns about inflaming tensions and protecting national security. The theory gained momentum when neighbors in Abbottabad reported hearing helicopters and explosions, but described seeing different aircraft than what the military officially acknowledged. Some residents claimed the compound had been empty for months before the raid, contradicting intelligence reports that bin Laden had been living there for years. Seymour Hersh, the investigative journalist who exposed the My Lai massacre, published claims in 2015 suggesting the entire operation was fundamentally different from the official version. His sources alleged that Pakistani intelligence had been holding bin Laden prisoner, and that the raid was essentially a handover operation rather than a surprise attack. The conspiracy extends further with claims that bin Laden had been suffering from kidney disease for years, and may have already died from natural causes well before 2011. Some point to the FBI's decision to remove him from their most wanted list only after the raid as suspicious timing rather than standard procedure. Body doubles and sophisticated prosthetics feature prominently in this narrative, with theorists analyzing facial features and height measurements from various bin Laden videos over the years, claiming to identify inconsistencies that suggest multiple people portraying the same individual. The lack of DNA evidence released to independent verification fuels additional speculation, as does the convenient malfunction of one helicopter during the raid, which required its destruction and removal of potentially contradictory evidence. Null compliance security refers to a purported cybersecurity practice where organizations deliberately implement systems that appear to meet regulatory standards while actually maintaining secret backdoors and vulnerabilities. The theory suggests that major tech companies and government contractors use what insiders call null compliance protocols. These systems pass automated security audits by technically meeting checkbox requirements, but contain hidden pathways that allow unauthorized access by specific entities. Former NSA contractor Edward Snowden's 2013 revelations touched on similar concepts, though null compliance goes deeper. The practice allegedly involves coding specific null values into database systems that trigger alternative authentication pathways when accessed with particular credentials. Security researcher Jake Williams documented unusual behavior in enterprise software during the 2010s, noting that certain applications would fail security scans in predictable ways, almost as if the failures were intentional features rather than bugs. The most compelling evidence comes from leaked internal documents from Clearwater Technologies, a now-defunct cybersecurity firm. These documents reference something called Project Hollow Shield, which described methods for creating compliant systems that maintain operational flexibility for authorized personnel. Corporate whistleblowers claim that null compliance became standard practice after the Patriot Act expanded surveillance requirements. Companies needed to appear secure to customers while remaining accessible to intelligence agencies. The technical implementation reportedly involves embedding null character exploits in security protocols themselves. When scanned by standard compliance tools, these systems register as secure because the tools cannot interpret the null values as functional code. Critics argue this practice undermines the entire foundation of cybersecurity certification, creating a shadow infrastructure where true security and apparent security exist as completely separate systems. Several major data breaches from the 2010s show patterns consistent with null compliance exploitation, though definitive proof remains elusive. The grain situation refers to allegations that global food shortages, particularly involving wheat, corn, and other staple grains, are being artificially manufactured by powerful interests rather than occurring naturally. This theory gained significant traction during the 2020s when multiple grain-producing regions experienced simultaneous supply disruptions. Believers point to the suspicious timing of these events: droughts in major wheat belts, fertilizer shortages affecting corn production, and transportation bottlenecks all happening within the same 18-month period. Central to this theory is the claim that a small number of agribusiness corporations control approximately 70% of global grain distribution. Companies like Cargill, Archer Daniels Midland, and Bunge are said to coordinate these artificial shortages to drive up prices and increase dependency on their distribution networks. The theory suggests these shortages serve multiple purposes beyond simple profit. By controlling basic food supplies, These entities can influence government policies, redirect population movements away from rural areas, and create conditions that favor large-scale industrial farming over small independent operations. Supporters of this theory highlight several suspicious patterns. Grain reserves in major producing countries like the United States and Russia often show dramatic decreases during the same periods when export restrictions are announced. Weather modification patents held by various corporations are cited as evidence that even seemingly natural disasters affecting crops might not be entirely natural. The 15-minute city concept, promoted by the World Economic Forum, is often connected to this theory. The idea being that concentrated urban populations become completely dependent on controlled food distribution systems, making resistance to broader social changes nearly impossible. Some versions of this theory extend beyond simple corporate manipulation to suggest coordinated efforts involving multiple governments and international organizations working toward deliberate population reduction through controlled starvation in specific regions. Baby monitor portals represent one of the most unsettling theories to emerge from modern parenting technology. The claim centers on the idea that these seemingly innocent devices don't just monitor sleeping infants, but accidentally create dimensional gateways that allow entities from other realms to observe and communicate with our world. The theory gained traction after numerous parents reported receiving transmissions that defied explanation. Unlike simple radio interference, these incidents involved voices speaking directly to children by name, often in languages the family didn't recognize. Some monitors displayed video feeds of rooms that didn't match the actual nursery layout, showing furniture arrangements that had never existed in the home. Radio frequency interference typically explains most baby monitor anomalies, as these devices operate on similar bands to cordless phones and other household electronics. However, believers point to cases where monitors functioned normally for months before suddenly beginning to broadcast content that seemed impossibly specific to the family's private conversations and routines. The theory suggests that the constant electromagnetic field generated by baby monitors, combined with the emotional energy present in nurseries, creates weak points in dimensional barriers. These weak points allegedly allow consciousness from parallel dimensions or spiritual realms to peer through and interact with our reality. Documented cases include the Morrison family from Ohio, whose monitor began displaying a child's room decorated in 20s-era wallpaper, complete with period-appropriate furniture that moved independently. The Nebraska incident of 2012 involved a monitor that broadcast clear audio of a woman singing lullabies in what linguists later identified as a dialect of Gaelic that hadn't been spoken for over 200 years. Technical analysis of these events reveals that many occurred during specific atmospheric conditions, particularly during geomagnetic storms when the Earth's magnetic field experiences disruption. Believers argue this supports their theory that baby monitors serve as accidental interdimensional communication devices during periods of heightened electromagnetic activity. The most disturbing aspect involves reports of entities apparently becoming aware they're being observed through these devices, with some monitors capturing footage of unknown figures looking directly into the camera and attempting communication. Haunted Tokyo apartments exist within a unique intersection of supernatural belief and real estate economics in Japan's capital city. These properties, known locally as Jikobuken, or accident properties, carry a dark history that dramatically affects their market value and tenant turnover rates. When someone dies unnaturally in a Tokyo apartment through self-removal, murder, or unexplained circumstances, that unit becomes legally and culturally tainted. Japanese law requires landlords to disclose these deaths to the immediate next tenant, but after that single disclosure, the property can be rented without mentioning its history. This creates a rotating cycle where unsuspecting renters move into apartments with hidden pasts. The Oshiage district near Tokyo Skytree contains several documented cases. One particular apartment building constructed in 1998 has seen 13 unexplained tenant departures across just 3 units over 2 decades. Tenants report identical phenomena: electronic devices malfunctioning at 3:37 a.m., unexplained cold spots near the bathroom, and the persistent smell of incense despite no burning sources. Property management companies have developed specialized cleaning services called spiritual cleansing that can cost upward of 200,000 yen per unit. These services combine traditional Shinto purification rituals with industrial-grade air filtration systems. Real estate websites like Milan specifically cater to budget-conscious renters willing to live in these discounted properties, with rent reductions ranging from 20 to 60% below market rate. Some digital nomads and international students actively seek these apartments for the financial savings, unknowingly becoming participants in what locals consider spiritual Russian roulette. The most documented case involves the Minami Senju apartment complex, where security cameras captured furniture moving independently across multiple units over a 6-month period in 2021. The Malcasian paradigm suggests that our entire reality is nothing more than a shadow cast by a higher dimensional realm. This theory claims that an alternate reality exists beyond our familiar physical dimension, with our world serving as just a reflection of this superior plane of existence. The paradigm centers on the idea that universal patterns and symbols act as bridges between these realities. Certain symbols repeatedly appear across different cultures and time periods because they originate from this higher reality, seeping through into our dimensional space. Think of how the spiral appears in galaxies, shells, and ancient artwork across civilizations that never contacted each other. What makes this theory particularly compelling is its attempt to merge quantum physics with mystical concepts. The paradigm draws parallels to quantum superposition and wave-particle duality, suggesting these phenomena indicate the existence of alternate realities and multiple dimensions. String theory and the many worlds interpretation already propose a multiverse where multiple realities coexist simultaneously. The symbol aspect builds heavily on Carl Jung's work with archetypes. According to the paradigm, the recurring symbols in our dreams, myths, and art might actually be messages from the higher reality, encoded in our collective unconscious. By studying these symbols, believers claim we can decode the nature of this superior dimension and understand our true role within it. The theory suggests that everything in our reality is interconnected at a fundamental level, forming an intricate web where the physical and spiritual merge. If true, this would completely transform how we understand consciousness, existence, and the very nature of what we perceive as real. Abandoned mall catacombs refers to the extensive underground tunnel networks that allegedly exist beneath defunct shopping centers across America. Urban explorers who venture into these decaying retail spaces report discovering elaborate subterranean passages that extend far beyond what any legitimate infrastructure would require. The most compelling evidence comes from the Randall Park Mall in Ohio, demolished in 2018, where construction crews supposedly found multi-level basement systems with corridors stretching nearly 2 kilometers in each direction. Workers described finding rooms filled with outdated computer equipment, industrial generators, and what appeared to be living quarters complete with bunk beds and cafeterias. These underground complexes supposedly served dual purposes during the mall's operational years. The surface level functioned as typical retail space, while the hidden lower levels operated as emergency government facilities or corporate research centers. The theory suggests that major mall developers like Simon Property Group intentionally constructed these spaces as part of Cold War-era continuity of government programs. Mall security footage from the 1980s and 90s allegedly shows unmarked vehicles entering through service tunnels during overnight hours. Former employees at locations like Century 3 Mall in Pennsylvania claim they were strictly forbidden from accessing certain basement areas, with some reporting they needed special clearance cards just to retrieve supplies from lower storage rooms. The tunnel systems reportedly connect multiple buildings within shopping complexes, and sometimes linked to nearby government facilities or military installations. When malls close permanently, these underground areas remain intact while the surface structures decay, creating hidden catacombs beneath America's suburban landscape. Demolition companies working on abandoned mall sites frequently report finding spaces that don't appear on any official building plans, complete with ventilation systems far more sophisticated than necessary for simple storage areas. Life on the Sun suggests that complex organisms, possibly even intelligent beings, exist within or on the surface of our nearest star. This theory claims that what mainstream science dismisses as solar flares and plasma formations actually represent massive structures and living entities thriving in the Sun's corona. The Sun's surface temperature reaches approximately 5,500 degrees Celsius, with the corona extending to over 1 million degrees. Traditional biology considers such conditions utterly incompatible with any known form of life. Yet theorists point to recurring geometric patterns in solar imagery captured by NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory and other space telescopes. Specific observations fuel these claims. In 2010, researchers noted unusual angular formations during a coronal mass ejection that appeared to move independently of surrounding plasma flows. The structures maintained coherent shapes for several hours before dissipating, behavior that some interpreted as deliberate rather than random. The theory extends beyond simple heat resistance. Proponents suggest these solar entities exist as pure energy beings, composed of organized electromagnetic fields rather than carbon-based matter. This would theoretically allow them to manipulate solar radiation and magnetic field lines as tools or transportation methods. NASA imagery from the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory has captured what believers identify as massive cylindrical objects, some measuring thousands of kilometers in length, appearing to extract material from the Sun's surface. Mainstream scientists classify these as natural phenomena related to magnetic reconnection events. The most compelling evidence cited involves apparent communication attempts. Radio telescopes have detected structured radio bursts originating from solar regions during periods of high geometric activity. While astronomers attribute these to natural plasma interactions, the theory suggests they represent attempts at contact from solar-based intelligence. Some versions of this theory propose that these beings actually created or significantly influence our solar system, using the Sun as both habitat and operational base for monitoring planetary development. Black goo represents one of the most secretive practices allegedly hidden within traditional Chinese alchemy and folk medicine. This substance supposedly combines ancient knowledge of toxicology with metaphysical properties that mainstream science refuses to acknowledge. According to traditional accounts, goo itself refers to a method of creating concentrated poisons by placing venomous creatures like scorpions, centipedes, and snakes together in sealed containers until only one survives. The survivor supposedly absorbs the essence of all the others, creating an incredibly potent substance. Black goo takes this concept further, allegedly requiring specific timing during new moon phases and the addition of rare mineral compounds found only in certain mountain regions of China. Practitioners claim black goo possesses properties that extend far beyond simple toxicity. Reports describe its use in consciousness alteration experiments conducted by secretive Taoist sects during the Tang Dynasty, roughly 618 to 907 CE. These groups supposedly discovered that controlled microdoses could enhance mental clarity and spiritual perception, while larger amounts produced effects that modern science cannot explain. The conspiracy deepens with claims that certain pharmaceutical companies have spent decades trying to synthesize black goo's active compounds. Documents allegedly leaked from research facilities in the 1990s describe unsuccessful attempts to replicate its molecular structure, with researchers noting that laboratory recreations lack the supposed metaphysical properties of traditionally prepared versions. Modern interest centers around testimonials from individuals claiming to have encountered authentic black goo through underground networks. These accounts describe experiences ranging from enhanced intuition to temporary states resembling out-of-body consciousness. However, verification remains impossible since legitimate practitioners supposedly operate in complete secrecy, passing knowledge only through bloodline inheritance or decades-long apprenticeships. The most controversial aspect involves allegations that certain government agencies have attempted to weaponize black goo's properties for interrogation purposes, though no concrete evidence supports these claims. Entropy encoding. This mathematical technique, hidden in plain sight within every digital file on your device, may be far more than just data compression. At its core, entropy encoding reduces file sizes by identifying patterns and redundancies in information. The algorithms analyze the frequency of data elements, assigning shorter codes to common patterns and longer codes to rare ones. Think of it like shorthand writing, but for computers. Claude Shannon developed the foundational principles at Bell Labs in the 1940s, the same facility where transistors and early computer systems emerged. Shannon's work on information theory established that every piece of data has a measurable entropy value, representing the minimum number of bits needed to encode that information without loss. What raises eyebrows is how perfectly these systems identify meaningful patterns in seemingly random data. Huffman coding, developed by David Huffman in 1952, can compress text files by 30 to 60% while maintaining perfect reconstruction. More advanced techniques like arithmetic coding achieve even higher compression ratios. The concerning element lies in the reverse process. If these algorithms can identify hidden patterns so efficiently, they can also embed information in ways that appear completely natural. A compressed file that looks perfectly normal could contain additional data streams, indistinguishable from the compression artifacts that already exist. Several researchers have documented cases where standard compression algorithms produced unexpected results when processing certain data types. Files that should compress poorly instead achieved remarkable reduction ratios, suggesting the presence of patterns that weren't immediately visible to human analysis. The widespread adoption of these encoding methods in everything from JPEG images to MP3 audio files means that virtually every digital communication passes through entropy-based processing at some point. Modern deep learning systems have begun identifying compression patterns that classical algorithms miss entirely, raising questions about what other information might be hiding in the mathematical spaces between our data. The Roswell fossils concept takes the infamous 1947 incident beyond crashed metal and alien bodies into the realm of systematic archaeological excavation. According to this theory, the initial crash site contained far more than what military officials recovered in those first crucial days. Believers claim that alien biological material and technology fragments became embedded in the desert soil over the decades, creating what amounts to an extraterrestrial fossil record. The idea suggests that microscopic alien DNA, crystallized technology components, and even complete organic structures remain buried across a much wider area than the official crash zone. Several independent researchers have reportedly conducted unauthorized digs in the Roswell region, using metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar to locate anomalous materials. These amateur archaeologists claim to have discovered metallic fragments with unusual isotope ratios and crystalline structures that don't match any known Earth materials. The theory gained traction in the early 2000s when former military personnel began describing systematic soil removal operations that continued for months after the official cleanup. These accounts describe unmarked trucks hauling away tons of contaminated earth to undisclosed government facilities. Some versions of this theory extend into what's called UFO archaeology, the belief that crash sites worldwide contain recoverable alien artifacts just waiting for proper excavation techniques. Proponents point to the fact that traditional archaeology often uncovers artifacts centuries after burial, suggesting that alien technology could similarly survive underground for decades. The most dedicated believers have formed informal networks, sharing geological surveys and soil analysis reports, treating the New Mexico desert like an active archaeological site where the next shovel full of dirt might contain proof of extraterrestrial visitation.